6:30, everybody. Welcome to Berlin. If we have time during the meeting, and unfortunately I don't think we will, I'll regale you with the experience that I'm engaged in with my family and a refugee family over in Maine, but, because it's actually interesting. And I'll see if we have any time because I think just about everybody here would be interested in that. Well, as a first order of business, I think it's obviously appropriate to welcome John Pandolfo to the board. And John and I have been acquaintances for 20, I would guess 20 years.
Close.
Yeah. And ask you if you have a few words you might want to offer about why you were subjecting yourself to this extracurricular activity. You needn't.
Well, I think my words on that would be that I think it's really important work. And I wouldn't want to profess to say that I know anything about anything, but I'm going to do my best to learn as quickly as I can and hopefully be able to help.
Good. Good. How long have you been superintendent in Barry?
I'm just starting my 5th year as superintendent. For 3 years before that, I was curriculum director in Barry.
Okay.
And then I was 4 years at U32, 9 years in Barry, and 6 years in California as a high school math teacher. So
That's why you know the numbers associated
That's right.
with each student. Good. Well, welcome. And so we'll get to the agenda in a minute. The first order of business after welcoming John is to ask if there's any public comment. 2 members of the public here. Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you. That saves a little time. I'm intended to start this way, but I got diverted by myself into the main story. This agenda is very, shall we say, comprehensive. And so I am going to try to do more than I usually do about moving things along. Feel free to help me, and we'll get through as much of this today as we possibly can. Are there any proposed changes in the agenda? Going once, going twice. I will assume we will adopt the agenda as presented. Reviewing the minutes, does anybody have any comments on the minutes as presented from the June 11th meeting?
I'll move it to 11 minutes.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The minutes have been, the June 11th meeting have been adopted. Moving on to the first real matter of business. This is labeled Act 11 follow-up. You'll all remember before I yield the floor to Laura about this, that way back in, I think it was January, we was presented with a sort of a draft changes to our governing documents so that they read consistently with what Act 11, which reconstituted this board, required. And we're at the point now where we want to submit them formally to the Department of Financial Regulation. Laura.
So just to add to that, you did as a board change the bylaws in 2 ways that you didn't have to comply with Act 11. You redefined quorum and you redefined an act of a majority. So what it takes to be a quorum, that, just to remind you, that was your decision, not Act 11. You decided that you would wait until the rules were final, that DFR had to adopt in case they put something in the rules that would cause you to relook at them. The rules were adopted June 20th. So after you last met, this is the first time you've met since those rules were adopted. And in speaking to DFR in June, they indicated that given that you aren't meeting again until today, they want you to submit the documents to them following this meeting. They do understand it's possible you may amend them further for other non-Act 11 related things, and they don't want you to wait because of that. So That was the request, and that's why it's in front of you. I put the documents in an entire second packet so that hopefully it'll be a little easier, but they haven't changed other than when you saw them in January.
Primarily because we've all had a chance to look at these documents before, and we actually acted on them, at least in a preliminary way. I'll call for any discussion, and if there isn't any, I'll ask for a motion to adopt them as presented in the board materials as posted.
Just a clarification, I thought we'd already adopted them, and what we're doing now is just authorizing submission.
Is there a motion?
I make the motion to authorize to submit these documents as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
You sure you know enough to do that?
That I know.
Thank you, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda stems from, primarily from the most recent information provided us by legal counsel, Halpert, regarding the conflict of interest discussions that we've had intermittently since last October. And you all have the 3-page memo that I wrote with the accompanying materials. And there's a quick filler. What Rob concluded with respect to the conflict of interest notion as it relates to board members who received their health insurance through VEHI is that under the current policy and disclosure statement definition, they have a financial interest, and one that constitutes, because of the definition, a conflict of interest, as a result of which they are foreclosed, in Rob's view, from considering or voting on either the rate discussion that we're going to be having and the budget, or at least two aspects of the budget. And I believe that any aspect of the budget applies in precisely the same manner. So seeing that, I offered to, and I did, write this memo, which does, this memo and the motion, which is on page 4. And the motion on page 4 does 2.5 things. The first thing it does is it changes the definition of conflict of interest in the policy and the disclosure statement so that it reads the same way as our governing bylaws definition reads. It also removes what we've been referring to, because that's its number, paragraph 8 from the implementation section of the conflict of interest policy, because that paragraph also defines, it expands, it sort of provides an additional meaning to the concept of conflict of interest in a manner that is equally inconsistent with the bylaws definition. And so the motion that I am making in a moment will be to delete that paragraph from the policy, as well as substitute the bylaws definition in the policy. And the second motion will be one that stems from Mr. Halpert's conclusion in response to the question that there are multiple other aspects of the conflict of interest policy that could use review. And so I'm suggesting I'll be moving that we actually engage in that review during the course of this coming year. And with that, I guess the proper thing for me to do is to formally make motion 1 as it appears on most of page 4 of that memo. And in essence, it is to change the board conflict of interest policy and the related disclosure statement so that the definition of conflict of interest reads as it does in the bylaws. And that includes eliminating paragraph 8 from the policy as well. So I so move.
Second.
Discussion.
I'd love to discuss if I may. A couple of things that I want to say. Speak to process, and the first piece is that I find that the memo contents and the process of disseminating the memo were not consistent with what I thought that Joel and I agreed to as part of agenda development. What I thought we agreed to was a brief memo explaining for discussion by the board, replacement of the definition of conflict of interest in the policy to match the bylaws. My understanding was the agreement, so that it was clear that it was a memo or a topic for discussion at the meeting, was that the communications would be attached and disseminated via the agenda. That didn't happen, and an email went out to the full board, and the contents of the emails went beyond what my understanding of the agreement for framing a discussion at this meeting would be. And unfortunately, I feel like the message contains a lot of discussion that I feel like if we want to build trust, build collaboration, and build our capacity to problem solve at the meeting, really should happen at the meeting. To that end, I will foreshadow that I personally am comfortable with the redefinition of conflict of interest, but I cannot support the motion as made, one, outside of the meeting, and two, incorporating things that I didn't think were coming forward for discussion today and are inconsistent with what I believe our obligation is as a board in terms of defining what conflicts of interest are, and lack reflection of our obligations to consider not only corporate law or nonprofit corporation law, but the guidance for school boards and municipalities, which also require us to address not only conflicts of interest, but the appearance of conflict of interest. Our policy statement, in fact, also speaks to the appearance of conflict of interest, and the board in the past worked very hard to define what that looked like, and paragraph 8 is a reflection of the board's definition of an example of a conflict of interest, or the appearance thereof. So I can't support motion 1 as written. If there's an option to amend it, to simply do the definition, I'd like to make that friendly amendment, to have it just be motion 1 is a replacement of the policy definition with the bylaws definition.
So 1A, Tracy, just to help me with the minutes. There's 1A and there's B.
Yes.
I'm only on motion 1.
1A. So my friendly amendment, if it's accepted, is to approve 1A only.
I have aside from a response, because this was directed at me, a clarifying question. The response is, I'm glad you characterize it as a lack of agreement between us about process, because what I put on paper for these 5 people was precisely what I thought I was supposed to do, and better. The clarifying question is, you said that paragraph 8 addresses the issue of appearance of conflict, and I'd like you to lay out to us where that is.
Do you have the policy in front of
It's
you?
it's on.
It's right there on the bottom of the motion page.
Page 7 is the whole policy.
So you said it was paragraph 8.
Sure, look at the very top line of the policy statement on the top on our policy.
No, you said it was found in paragraph 8.
No,
You didn't mean that. Is that what you're using?
I don't think I meant to say that.
You said you directly associated the appearance issue with paragraph 8. That's what my question is. You didn't mean that. You meant it somewhere else in the policy. Is that right?
Let me take you back to the policy, and I'll try and clarify. The policy statement says, "The ethical and legal duty of all VEHI board members to avoid conflict of interest, as well as the appearance of conflicts of interest." And it goes on to speak about implementation and identifies the standards that accomplish that policy.
Yes.
And that's where item 8 comes into play, whether it's actual or perceived, that is the board's work to define how that plays out in our operations.
Would you agree that what you just said is inconsistent with the bylaws?
No.
You would not agree with that. Can you point out anything in the bylaws that addresses the issue of appearance of conflict being a disqualifying conflict of interest?
I agree, and I would say,
You agree with
I
what?
agree that I think our bylaws should speak to the appearance of conflict of interest based
So-
on municipal law and
So
education
you're
law.
saying that bylaws
Could be
do not
enhanced.
explicitly refer to conflict, to appearance of conflict, is that right?
I believe our bylaws could be enhanced by doing that.
I'm asking you if they are silent on the issue of appearance of conflict.
I've given you my answer, so I'm not gonna be interrogated at a board meeting.
Well, because you didn't answer the question. All right, I will yield to others for discussion. I think John and then Fran.
Well, I think I would like to second the friendly amendment, and then I have a,
Okay, let me suggest, a friendly amendment is for the maker to agree to or not, and I do not agree to it.
Understood.
And so, at some point, I guess it would be in order for someone to make a motion to amend my motion, and then a second to that would be in order. So to cut through it, Tracy, are you?
I'll make a
are you
motion to
intending to move?
Sure.
To amend the motion in chief to read only as it does in Part A of the motion?
Yes. So
And
moved.
John is seconding it. Okay.
and then I would like to just ask a question,
Sure.
I think, and again, acknowledging that I'm jumping into this, but I have a pretty clear understanding of the need to change the definition of conflict of interest in the policy to be in agreement with what's in the bylaws. From everything I could see in preparing for this meeting, that's pretty obvious. It's not as obvious, whether it be from recommendations of legal counsel or anything else, of the need to strike paragraph 8 at the same time. But then the next motion that you discussed talks about reviewing the other policy and disclosure statement provisions. So I would assume that would include some of what you and Tracy were just discussing in terms of maybe where things don't appear consistent in the bylaws with what's in the policy, or the type of confusion you were just referring to. And to me, at that point when that review is going on, that would appear to be a time when paragraph 8 could be taken under consideration. But I guess my question is, and maybe I should let other people go before I ask the question, am I missing something in terms of why paragraph 8 needs to be dealt with right now?
I don't know that you're missing something or not, but paragraph 8 fundamentally adds to the definition of conflict of interest. My intention throughout this discussion and for a long time now has been to conform the meaning of conflict of interest to how it is defined in the bylaws. Paragraph 8 is inconsistent with the bylaws definition. I say definition redundantly, John, because that's what I was intending to address, was the definition and not other aspects of the policy. But I understand your point. Fran? Or not? You can cast.
I'm not sure. I guess I'm not sure what we're doing here. If we just approve motion 1A, definition should be amended to conform them to the bylaws. the bylaws and the policy should be aligned, that's the word, thank you. So if we if we do the motion 1A, but not that paragraph 8, are we still out of alignment?
Well, I'll try my hand at a response, yes. Yes, because the bylaws say that if you have a conflict of interest, you shall not participate. It does not, and it defines conflict of interest as a significant pecuniary interest, and with a couple of qualifiers that don't apply immediately here. Paragraph 8 purports to do two things that are inconsistent with the bylaws. The bylaws say if you have a significant pecuniary interest, you shall not vote. If the board so determines that you shall not vote. The bylaws do not say if you have a designated seat on the VEHI board that is also receiving financial compensation, etc., you shall not vote. So the meaning of a conflict of interest must, under the bylaws, involve a significant pecuniary interest. That, and we can go into that if we need to, but you all have you all have an earlier memo from me about that. And the second part that is simply anathema to the bylaws is the notion that by policy this board can deprive one of its own members of the right to vote apart from there being a significant pecuniary interest that rises to the level of a conflict of interest. So which is what the point I made in June, citing Robert's Rules of Order, of all things, for support. But I will tell you that Robert's Rules of Order merely restate what is in the Lord's black letter law. I think I saw Tracy before.
So I just want to say I appreciate your background in law, Joel, but also want to clarify that you're not necessarily legal counsel for the board.
I am not legal counsel.
I know.
for the board. I was
Please let me
responding
finish
as-
without interruption.
I
Please,
don't want to
can
be
I?
mischaracterized again like that. I'm not legal counsel.
I'm
for
not
the board.
characterizing anything you say. I'd like to speak without interruption. I just want to make sure the board, members of the public present, and others understand that you're not counsel for the board, and the remarks that you made are your opinion on the interpretation of law, policy, and our obligations. And I want to disagree and say that my understanding of the obligations of boards, again, under municipal law and under the law that pertains to a special type of municipality, a school district, is that boards are obligated to define how conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflict of interest play out in policy. And I see that quite differently from the way you do, and I want to be sure that the board has the opportunity to consider a different point of view and a different perspective on that matter.
That's why we have discussions. I will say this, that of course an organization can define conflict of interest to include something related to appearances. This board chose not to when it adopted the definition that it did in the bylaws. So any intention to add the notion of appearance of a conflict to our body of policy has to be done in a manner consistent with the bylaws, which means we have to change the bylaws. Peg.
I was just focused on the part that Tracy brought up about the appearance of a conflict of interest, and when I look at the policy, I think it's covered without Part 8 there, I really do, in more generic forms, but number 1 would not give the impression that they would represent special interests, and number 3, not use the position to promote business or personal financial interest. Number 5, will not give the impression they can be influenced. I think that's in there. I think that's all about the appearance. And by agreeing to those pieces, we've agreed that we're going to be clear with when our conflicts of interest arise. If they do, state them and move on. I don't see the need for Part 8. I think it added a great deal of confusion. When I was asked to join the board, I went to the bylaws, I read the description of conflict of interest, and so my mind was very clear at that point that it was fine for me to serve on this board. After that, the other things came into play and became available, and it's created a great deal of confusion. I'd like to see that eliminated.
The motion before us is whether to amend the motion to amend the policy so that it reads consistently in the definition with our bylaws, and to remove paragraph 8. The motion before us is whether to amend that motion so as to eliminate the elimination of paragraph 8. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? Aye. Nay. All those said nay.
I'm sorry, I'm not, I
You
heard
didn't get the names, okay.
you, I thought you said ayes, but I'm not sure how you said it.
You're right.
So can we vote
If you don't mind
again?
my doing that again. It's-
Who's voting in favor of the
who's-
amendment?
All those in favor of this amendment, please.
And the amendment is just dealing with
Is to remove
motion
from the motion in
1A
chief
and exclude
paragraph.
B, right?
Is to remove B. All those in favor, I'm gonna write this time, say aye.
Aye.
I believe that is Martha. Hi again, Martha.
Aye.
We saw each other in another venue, John and Tracy. All those against, please say nay.
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 That would be Peg, Fran, and Joel as chair.
Can,
And the motion is defeated, and that will bring us back to the motion in chief, which includes both parts A and B on page 4. Fran?
I guess what I like to hear is what sort of solution maybe Tracy or somebody wants to put forth that would establish this definition of conflict of interest, the significant, that reflects, that doesn't leave us with at least 4 of us not being able to vote on things.
Well,
Because the way I sort of am seeing it is that there seems to be this push to perceive conflict of interest, anyone who is connected with services from VEHI, and that's at least 4 of us all the time.
If I
So, how do you want to define conflict of interest so we don't have 4 people always having to be, not voting?
It's
You go,
a
Ed.
simple addition, not to answer your question, but I'll yield to Tracy. John, I'm not picking on you, but are you insured through VEHI? I believe you are. I think we can safely say, everybody but me, all 5 of you are receive benefits through VEHI. Okay, Tracy.
The answer is simple, and I'm glad that you asked that question. The change in definition to conflict of interest would allow all members of the board to vote on things like budget, although I haven't recently reviewed that piece of the earlier communications and discussions, so don't remember that, and rate setting, and contracts with service providers, and all of those things. It would preclude the appointees of Vermont NEA from voting on the service agreement for just that particular item. That's what item number 8 speaks to. So again, taking a step to amend or align the definitions of conflict of interest would clear up the ability of folks who receive their benefits through VEHI to participate in votes on those matters. And it leaves simply, item 8, leaves simply the issue of whether or not it's not appropriate for the appointees of a particular organization to vote on the service agreement for that particular organization, either as an actual or perceived conflict of interest.
So then,
Go ahead.
so my concern then is the proposed discrimination really slaps the legislators and Act 11, is that what established the balance? And it then, whatever, it would seem to me that yeah, it's a discriminatory action that slams the legislation that establishes the board, which is a whole big issue that Section 8 or not Section 8, that seems to, that's what has to be then addressed to.
I want to add to that. And maybe this is for John, I don't know if it's edification, John, but we've been around this block several times with respect to the meaning of paragraph 8 as it currently exists. Tracy continues to maintain, apparently, that it applies to any appointee of Vermont NEA. I simply disagree entirely and believe that when it was adopted, it was intended to prohibit the executive director of Vermont NEA, who was the sole appointee, the sole designee of Vermont NEA at the time, to vote on this service agreement. These seats that I occupy, and that Fran occupies, and that Peg occupies, are not seats that are designated by Vermont NEA. We are people appointed to VEHI. Now, whether that distinction is correct or not doesn't matter here. Tracy was asked a question and she gave her response for why she thinks it was appropriate. I'm telling you that there is a significant difference of opinion on that very question here. The motion before us now is whether to adopt parts A and B of the motion that regarding the definition of conflict of interest in our policy so that it reflects the bylaws meaning and deletes paragraph 8, which is itself a reflection, an accurate reflection of the bylaws definition as well. Is there any further discussion about that motion?
I have two more questions, I
Sure.
think, to try to get clarity on this. So my first is, and again, I've looked at an awful lot of information and maybe I'm not remembering it right, but did we not have a specific recommendation from legal counsel to do the change in definition, but not a specific recommendation to delete paragraph 8 thus far?
I don't think
He was silent on paragraph 8,
I don't think he voiced a recommendation.
on paragraph 8.
I don't think he voiced a recommendation. What he did was, he was presented with a couple of scenarios and asked the question, to what extent would these constitute a conflict of interest, and he reached a conclusion about that. I don't believe he was asked specifically. I could, maybe my memory is wrong about, I'm hesitating because I think I'm wrong. I'm just going to say that he didn't offer an opinion about paragraph 8. But it wasn't, I understand that I'm mincing words away, but it wasn't a recommendation, it was a conclusion, leaving to us the determination what to do about it. Laura, you have a?
There's 2 items on the agenda today that well, 3 items, the health rates, the dental rates, and the budget. That my recollection in reading Rob Halbert's opinion is that unless you align the definition, and by definition I mean the paragraph under the word definition on the policy, that one paragraph, if you don't align that today you don't amend that today to align with the bylaws, you're gonna have trouble doing those 3 things, 2 rates and a budget.
That was my second question, but I actually had a third if I could ask one more.
You could have gotten away with not telling us, but that was your second.
I like that. So, how would it play out in terms of the concern that you expressed, Fran, if paragraph 8 were left in.
How would it play out?
So in other words, if there were a vote on the Vermont NEA service agreement, and everyone was allowed to vote, and there was disagreement on the service agreement, then I would assume that there might be a split vote, or there wouldn't be the two members voting in favor from, I will say, this side of the table. But, so without that, it's not gonna pass regardless. But if your side of the table is able to vote, whether you're able to vote and vote yes, or whether you're not able to vote, and then there is no vote, it's not gonna pass without this side of the table.
John, let me
voting.
suggest a couple of things. I guess you're right in the conclusion, but you're wrong in the assumption.
Understood.
Your assumption was that with paragraph 8 remaining, that people in this room on this board would be prohibited from voting. That, in my view, is simply wrong.
Understood, but if it played out that way,
If-
I'm not saying that, I
Understood.
understand your interpretation is that's not the case. I get that.
Okay, but you are right, to the extent that we make any decision in this room, it has to be, it is adopted only with at least 2 votes from each set of appointees from the school boards and from Vermont NEA. The motion before us is whether, and we have acted on a motion to amend by deleting reference to the deletion of paragraph 8, and that has failed. So the motion that we are considering remains one that has both components to it, changing the definition in chief and changing and deleting paragraph 8. Is there any further discussion?
Can I discuss after the vote?
Excuse me?
After we vote,
Can we what?
after we vote on the motion, can I say something? Or should I discuss it
presume
now?
so, I'm not quite sure what
Okay.
you're asking for.
Never
I
mind.
guess I will say something beforehand. I've put, obviously, to be blunt, a lot of effort into this. And that's not a reason to agree or disagree with it, but I put a lot of effort to it, including what happens right now if this board does not change the definition. And Laura has already addressed it. In essence, it is that 5 people in this room will be prohibited from taking part in consideration and voting on specific matters that are about to be dealt with in the agenda. And as much as I have often thought of myself as an authoritarian, I don't relish the notion of being a quorum of 1. That seems to be legitimate, by the way, under the law. A quorum consists of people left in the room who do not have a conflict of interest. If, and to be further blunt, I'm prepared at least to raise the specter of a conflict of interest claim that has to be dealt with immediately in this room if we fail to do this, because we've got to get these issues addressed today. So is there any further discussion about the motion
Yes, then I'll make.
before the vote?
Before the vote,
Okay.
before we make the statement, or before we take the vote. As a follow-up to your statement, Joel, I will foreshadow that I intend to vote against this motion as written. I think it's really unfortunate that all of the business of the board that is essential that we complete today is being held hostage based on the wish of some board members to have the ability to vote on the service agreement with Vermont NEA. And I sincerely hope that if this vote doesn't pass, we'll have an opportunity to make a new motion that simply replaces the definition in policy with the definition in bylaws and empower this board to go forward and do the essential business that we need to do in order to keep our organization on track.
As the maker of the motion, I will take, not offense, I will try again to be clear. As far as I'm concerned, paragraph 8 was null and void the moment it was adopted. we, sitting here, without changing the bylaws, may not deprive any of us of the right to vote unless we change the bylaws. If you think otherwise, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm entitled to mine. I think, without question, to be blunt, I'm right about that. Secondly, removing paragraph 8 has nothing to do anymore with whether people get to vote on the service agreement or not, largely because John was right 10 minutes ago when he suggested that his reading is that with or without Vermont NEA appointees voting for or not voting for the service agreement, it only takes 2 other members of this board to vote against it to defeat whatever proposal is being made about it. This is about conforming our policies to our bylaws. That's what organizations do. Any other comments? Fran?
Again, my concern is that the bylaws and the policy need to be in alignment. We have to be able to take action. And I personally resent the idea that we're trying to set it up so that there is the attack and discrimination against those of us that have not been appointed by the Vermont School Board Association.
You know, it's one of those.
And I resent that. Because you're making an assumption about how I'm gonna vote on issues, and you're not then allowing us to discuss the issues that would come before us. You making the determination that we vote based on who appointed us. And I don't report back to the Vermont NEA, so as long as there's still that sort of elephant in the room,
It's there. And,
I'm sorry you don't like Act 11, but we're gonna have to figure out how to live with it.
and Tracy, just not to pile on, but you made an assumption about motivation that is simply offensive. You're entitled to it, but I'm entitled to be offended at the assumption that the reason to do this is somehow to enable people to vote,
So
as opposed to being deprived of the right to vote. Whether they vote or not is probably not determinative of the outcome of the very matter you're talking about. This
So-
is about basically basic civics.
it's funny that the conversation is about assumptions about other people's values and intentions, and want to reiterate again that I believe we have an obligation to pay attention to real and perceived, or potentially perceived conflicts of interest. And I think it quite easily, regardless of how good people are in the room, or what their intentions are, I think it is very likely that voting on the service agreement for the organization that appoints you to this board, at a minimum, presents the appearance of a conflict of interest. And I think that in the interest of supporting this board and this organization in demonstrating our commitment to operating with integrity, with transparency, and in the best interest of all the stakeholders we serve, I appreciate having the opportunity to have an open, honest conversation about that issue.
Other comments? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of adopting motion 1, parts A and B together, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
I will ask leave to withdraw motion 2 because we need more time. I didn't make it, you're right, and I will not ask for leave, I just won't proceed to do so. At this point, I feel obligated to invoke the conflict of interest policy as it currently reads. I don't want to, but I have to. didn't make me look for something. Fine, if you'll all understand it. Because I anticipated not the likelihood, but the possibility of that vote, I'm going to file right now a written claim of conflict of interest to begin with regarding board member Tracy Rend, and I will read it. And then we will proceed immediately to an informal hearing and a conclusion about it.
Sorry, is this on the agenda? Have I been given notice? Are you following the policy?
Do I get to read my work without your interruption? Do I or not?
I have rights as well, and I'm asking those questions.
This board cannot proceed with the major business of the day without our resolving unresolved conflicts of interest as they currently now stand. And what you will hear from me and read from me is a claim that first you and serially Martha Gagne and serially John Pandolfo have a conflict of interest by virtue of the continued definition of that term in our policy. I am writing the VEHI Board of Directors under its conflict of interest policy to file a claim of conflict of interest regarding Tracy Rend by virtue of her receipt of medical benefits through VEHI. She has by virtue of her receipt of medical benefits through VEHI, she has a pecuniary interest in the outcome of board consideration of 1, health insurance premium rate changes, and 2, the VEHI budget. Because both matters appear on the agenda of the August 26th meeting, this claim must be resolved at the meeting and prior to consideration of those matters. This claim stems from legal advice solicited by the board this past spring from its longstanding legal counsel, Rob Halpert, in which he concluded that under the current policy, the current conflict of interest policy, directors receiving medical benefits through VEHI, quote, would be barred from voting on any premium increase / reduction under the policy, unquote. He concluded they would not have a conflict of interest if the policy definition of the term were changed to the one appearing in VEHI's bylaws. He concluded similarly regarding VEHI budget matters. As an aside, the budget matters that he specifically referred to were the service agreements, but I don't think there's really room for doubt that his reasoning extends to all budget matters. By action August 26, 2019, immediately prior to the submission of this claim, the board voted not to change the policy definition to the one appearing in VEHI's bylaws, leaving in place the policy's absolute prohibition of a director having any financial interest in a matter before the board. Tracy Rend voted against this change, indicating her support for board reliance on the policy definition of conflict of interest in assessing conflict of interest claims. As a result, she has a policy conflict of interest to be addressed before board consideration of health insurance premium rate changes and the VEHI budget. I guess I have to ask you to.
You only have one.
Yeah. To make copies and,
There's something else? Joel?
not yet.
So I,
I'm not concluded.
okay.
Under the policy, I have the authority to schedule to order an informal hearing. And we all know the issues. There doesn't seem to be much need for significant preparation. As I said before, I anticipated this, but did not entirely expect that it would happen. And because I anticipated it, I'm following through in accordance with the policy. We have got to resolve this conflict of interest disagreement between the bylaws and the policy some way or other, or we cannot do business. If you'll look with me at page 10 of that, the last page of the memo, it's only a 3-page memo, but the last attachment, I don't know that you got to it. in your reading. I know that others didn't, some others didn't. But if you look at the bottom, I did a quick and dirty, but it's not dirty, a quick estimate for us about the size, the significance of the director's financial interest in either premium rate change discussion or budget change. And there's nothing exact about it, but it's pretty approximately average. If the average subscriber, VEHI subscriber, pays $13,000 in premium, and that's a single, double, two-person and family coverage, and pays 20% of it, that's about $2,600. Every percent change in premiums involves a $26 financial interest on the part of people, on the part of subscribers, 5 people in this room. And if there's a 10% change, then it's a $260 financial interest. And fact is, our conflict of interest policy doesn't specify any range, it just says any financial interest. And you have a financial interest by virtue of retaining this definition and voting not to change it. So with that,
Thank you, Joel. I do think this is a little out of order and not necessarily following of the procedures in our policy.
please point out how.
Nonetheless,
Yeah, please
I
point
would,
out how.
I'd like to offer a really simple and productive way to resolve any potential conflict of interest without pursuing a hearing or further disruption. And to that end, and I think the whole board could be a part of it, and it could resolve a number of issues for all of us at the board. Because none of us have voted on premiums yet, so it's a little premature to say that I have violated any kind of conflict of interest. So to resolve this productively for all of us, I move that the definition of conflict of interest in the bylaws replace the definition of conflict of interest in the policy. And in doing so, anyone who has financial benefit as a matter of participating in insurance plans based on the assumptions that you're making, could be able to participate in a vote on premium rates and on our budget. So I made that motion, and hopefully the board will accept that as an expeditious resolution that will allow us to go forward and do the work that we need to do.
I'm not mistaken, is there a second?
I just seconded it.
Question. By virtue of the fact, by virtue of the board's having already considered whether to act on that motion and voted in the negative, isn't your motion out of order?
We did not consider that motion. We considered an amendment to your motion, and we considered your motion.
The amendment to that motion would have left this motion to be voted on.
It would have had it passed, and if we had voted on it, bringing it back a second time might not have worked. But if you really want to prevent me from bringing forward a resolution, I don't think you can in this way.
Discussion?
I have discussion. So I guess what I would like to say is, I am not necessarily, at some point in the future, adverse to considering paragraph 8 coming out of the policy. But I feel like I need more information on that, and I think the letter that you, what you just handed around, very clearly states that Rob Halford, concluded that under the current conflict of interest policy, blah, 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 would be barred. He concluded they would not have a conflict of interest if the policy definition of the term were changed to the one appearing in the bylaws. So I think that was the amendment previously in this motion, and that's right in the statement that you put in here. But I would, move or suggest, I don't want to say I'm making a motion right now, that your piece about paragraph 8 can be embedded in your motion too, and that be considered as part of the review that we do on the policies. And that would allow us to conduct our business as we get conducted today. And I guess I would further note that I'm not sure if this that you sent around has Tracy's name on it, but you made reference to Martha and I serially, so I'm not sure if that applies or that would be the next step.
Would be the next step.
But I guess my question is, if the two ladies on this side of the table voted against the amendment, wouldn't they need to have the same claim of conflict of interest? 'Cause they,
You know, it's not up to me to do that. The distinction in my mind was they voted in favor of changing the policy definition. And they also noted on their disclosure statements, which you don't know anything about, that they disagreed with the definition as it appeared on the disclosure. I can't, none of us can stop any of us from filing a claim of conflict of interest, so one would be free to do so if you want, but those are the distinctions that guided me.
Question. Were you suggesting that that Tracy's motion, which is to adopt this definition of conflict of interest, that would bring the policy and the bylaws into alignment? Were you putting asking if she would add that the discussion of paragraph 8 would be addressed at a later time, or in some fashion or something?
That's what I.
As a friendly motion to her?
I wasn't trying to make an amendment. I think my first question that I asked, what seems like quite a while ago now, but when we got on this agenda item, was that I understand this change of definition and how it applies, and that from what I think Joel's paragraph here says, that was a specific recommendation of our legal counsel. I don't understand the full significance of paragraph 8, so to me, that would fall into the review of other policy and disclosure date statement provisions throughout the coming year, and if we get legal advice and it makes sense that that be removed, I would be in full support of that, but I can't be in full support of it right now. But I absolutely am in full support of making the change to definitions and moving forward so we can get today's business done.
Tracy, I didn't ask you if you agreed that under the policy definition, this is in accordance with the policy, you acknowledge that there is a conflict of interest on your part.
I'm not gonna answer that right now. I've made a motion that's on the table to resolve this, and I'm wondering if the board is open to that. I think it would resolve it for everybody in the room.
Well, I'd be open if there's the caveat or whatever, that paragraph 8 still needs to be addressed. My concern is that if we go along with the change, but then the minute that we get a vote on the service agreements, you're gonna try to charge me with conflict of interest and keep me from voting on it. So, as far as I'm concerned, that's not been resolved, even with your,
Yeah.
so if we break it into little baby steps here, but if something comes up where I'm voting, then you're gonna charge me with conflict of interest, then we're gonna have to
I'll tell you what,
go after that then.
I'm trying to.
Because just because the Vermont EA appointed me doesn't mean that I don't feel that I can't vote on service agreements.
I hear you.
You were offering, I thought I heard you say, I'll tell you what, or something like that.
I was trying to think about a way to be responsive to that
Good.
that word. I would welcome a friendly amendment that adds motion 2, including consideration of paragraph 8.
I would make that
I don't
motion.
know.
That
The wording.
that the motion on the table would also include reviewing other policy and disclosure statements provisions during the coming year, including but not limited to paragraph 8 of the implementation section of the conflict of interest policy.
I don't want to put words in Fran's mouth, but I understood her concern to be what happens later on during this very meeting. Does she get to expect that there will be forbearance on the part of board members about invoking paragraph 8? Or is she right in assuming otherwise, that in fact someone will attempt to prohibit her from voting when it comes time to discuss the service agreement with Vermont EA? Until that's resolved, I think we have an ongoing issue.
But John made a motion to amend.
Second amendment.
And then I think that's part of the discussion.
Okay,
Now it's-
there you go.
I'm thinking.
Fair enough.
And
Can I make an observation?
Yes, of course. Yes.
At the last meeting, there were 2, if not 3, motions on the service agreement that everybody voted on, and no conflict of interest complaint has been brought.
Exactly.
Do with that what you will, but that's an observation.
Thank you. So.
So
the-
how does this
there's a-
push you
now
read it?
there's- The motion on the table, as I understand it, reads essentially as follows, that the definition of conflict of interest in the conflict of interest policy be amended to read as it does in the bylaws, and that the board will conduct essentially a review of other provisions of the policy during the coming year.
Including
No,
but not
Including.
limited to.
2 motions. Tracy's motion is that the definition of conflict of interest in the bylaws replace the definition in the policy to allow the board to conduct its business. John's amendment is to add to that motion to include the board engaged during fiscal year 2020 in a thorough review of its conflict of interest policy provisions, including but not limited to paragraph 8.
And I also added policy and disclosure statement only because that had come up as a.
Yeah,
as a-
disclosure, thank you, I missed that.
It would pretty much have to, at long last, have to be that the disclosure statement follows other rules in this business. All right, so the current pending motion has those 2 parts about changing the definition and reviewing the rest of the policy as we wish, so long as that includes paragraph 8.
That's the amendment.
Review.
So we have to vote on that.
That's-
You have to vote on
Okay.
the amendment first.
Well, unless Tracy, you're taking it as a
Oh,
friendly.
I accept
I'm
it.
sorry.
Oh, she accepted as a
We should
friendly
vote-
amendment.
We'll vote
Okay.
on it for clarity. Let's vote on it for clarity.
Because you have made an amendment.
I was just presenting the motion
But-
for discussion. The complete motion is those 2 parts. Is there any discussion? If not,
Yeah.
let's vote, we're voting to amend the motion.
Correct.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion has been adopted.
It's been amended.
It's been amended, now we vote on it.
Motion to amend has been adopted, and we have amended the motion in chief. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And we'll see what happens.
Before we move into what will be a staff now.
Well, let me, I will not withdraw my claim, but I will say that as far as I am concerned, the claim of conflict of interest regarding Tracy Rand has been resolved by changing the definition of conflict of interest to that which appears in the bylaws. Okay, thank you all. So I'm looking, I'm looking for a way to keep us from talking about the financials so that Chris can engage in yet another 4 hours or so sitting there.
We have to engage the financial
Oh,
related to
all
the
right.
rate. You have no
I
choice.
knew that.
But you may want people to have a working dinner and get their sandwich.
It is 5:30.
We're gonna be a
I
good
could
half
use
an
a
hour.
little
Okay, shall we, so what shall we do? Shall we get through
lead
and
time.
Chris, do you mind presenting?
I don't at
how we
all,
have
yeah,
it?
no, you guys
That'll
meet,
keep us from
and then I'll,
interrupting you.
because I'll stop talking here at some point, and then I'll leave,
All
so
right.
that's good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
The food's right outside.
There is food, Nicole and Elizabeth, there's a couple extras.
Thank you very much.
So the ones that
Very
don't have a name, person's name on it are open. And if you don't want water, I don't know what's in our fridge other than coffee, but people can go poke around and look. You can, you don't, does she know?
how many
Yeah.
miles mine is.
If
It's
it's
on
not
that
different-
email that I'd sent over and over and over again, but I don't know what it is off the top of my
Oh, no,
head.
that's fine.
We'll fill that in.
That's fine.
And if you tell me what it is next month,
It was a
next time, if we're
Yeah,
gonna do that.
really,
just
I
tell
only
me.
need it if you're, if
It's
it's
the
different.
definition,
it's
and
not-
then it was Joel's.
That's what I
motion.
really show.
It's the same.
John's motion?
No, Joel had made this.
Okay.
But John made it. Joel had written it as something he
And
was
John
going
adopted,
to
John
move.
essentially adopted.
John moved that this part, that added to Tracy's motion, that during fiscal year 2020, in a, would engage
That's why I'm here, or something.
in a thorough review of the conflict of interest policy and disclosure statement, including but not limited to paragraph 8.
You're a little lost.
And I've got it on tape so I can remind myself when I'm crazy.
I think we are now authorized to perform that disclosure statement.
Well,
I'll take whatever's there. I'm delighted to have
What you
something.
wanna do, I don't know, so here was my thinking.
Yeah, and I know.
If you didn't bring it up, I was gonna say nothing, that was my first thought.
It was.
My second thought is,
I think we really
I
need
think
to-
you should, even though you will probably do it again, as you continue to work, but it probably makes sense to do it.
I absolutely agree. This is unfortunately education.
So it has the definition, it has to disclose, it has, if you have it, but no- I did, and if no, say no.
Okay.
The
And
booby
it
back
is a version.
water.
I know.
It's a round bottom.
I'll let people know.
That one's
Could
like
be
a little
challenging.
wobbly.
Yeah, they are a little wobbly.
Oh, before the next board meeting, they should show up with the
Chili?
next board meeting.
Yeah, a little bit.
Stand outside for a minute.
Who offered that
It's
they
41 when I left my house this morning.
What if I add
41.
this is like nice.
It was brisk.
You'll tell people.
And then, our blueberries came in late this year, and we had the blueberries patches. I was out reading the other day, and I'm like, oh, the blueberries are, they're kind of like squishy when they come out. And I think it's because they're starting to get with like frost. And normally they're all in, they normally come in around the end of July, very early August. And I think that's the time, because I'm not, you know, we're planning for long, it's like, they're always like this, like 2 days ago, they weren't ready.
Okay.
But I think it is,
talked
I
about
think
tonight,
we're starting to
I'll
get
back
enough of a light
And
frost
then
that's actually
Because it was
causing.
digging that deep.
And
Got it.
jam a lot.
I just thought I'd write for you.
Yeah.
And also, there's a Wisconsin.
Do you have a lot of them? Do you have a big-
Enough, I mean, we have about, I
So,
think,
what you find at the end
11 or
is-
12 bushes. And, most of them have been in the ground for 15
Also, I
to 20
think in the
years now.
Dropbox,
So they're
I know they're-
really coming in, I mean, I don't know.
using this.
I freeze a lot of them. We use paper and, you know, everybody in my family has blueberries.
Yeah,
Blueberries,
the Dropbox can be
blueberries.
Abandon hope, all ye who enter.
Even my mother started eating blueberries, so,
They're great, they're good for you.
yeah. Yeah, I, you know, they do them
I
later.
think this is extra, but before I put it in the fridge, has everyone got food other than Mark?
Not me yet, I'll be out
I
there in a
know, but
sec.
you have a name on your box.
Okay.
Everybody else has something to eat. I'm gonna put this in the fridge.
One more, so, there you go.
I'm
Thank you.
impressed.
Favorite salad, the green goddess.
That's a good salad.
I like the name. Probably not. Healthy
Lisa did that?
So you actually are
It's not part of the law. Oh, it comes with it.
allowing them this late.
I have a parent who lives in Morris County. And on the party doesn't even in their bylaws.
So Chris Roberts is the most patient person in the room. She's been waiting for her 15 minutes of, I'm not sure this is fame, for upwards of maybe half a year.
Or more. So,
You're gonna ruin that reputation for patience that way. But before I yield the
yeah,
floor,
4 years to figure it out.
I'd like your attention. I don't have that.
You have 4 years to figure it out.
Chair wants our attention.
Have we haven't distributed that disclosure statement. That's all right, we haven't, right?
No, it's right here, you know it?
No, I don't want to right now. The strong suggestion here is that in light of the changed definition, meaning of conflict of interest, that it is now appropriate for each of us, and we may have another occasion later in the fall, to file a new disclosure statement. Given the time, and we'll see what happens during the course of the meeting, but anticipating no particular problem, what I ask you to do is to take the disclosure form with you and come back with it completed for the September 24th meeting, or send it if you won't be able to attend that meeting. And for what it's worth, this is not my controlling nature, believe it or not, but my attempt to be helpful. On page 10 of that memo that I provided all of you, in the middle of the page, I offered my own thoughts about how I might complete the disclosure statement with a new definition if I felt that I had a conflict of interest that, or if I felt I had a financial interest that implicated the policy in some way. But feel free to ignore it if you want, but it's there if you want to review it. So we'll hold off until Chris is done, and I'll just hand these numbers out. Most of you, except for John, has seen them already. But Laura went ahead and, anticipating our action, changed the statement so that it was practical.
John filled one out, I actually have one on file.
And I believe I
You
put
get to
something
do
like
another,
what you.
the new one?
No, he didn't do the new one.
So we all get to do it again?
Yeah.
All right, okay? And with that, Chris, and with our sincere apologies. you've
Quite
been-
all right, quite all right.
I
I'm
hope
just glad
you're
to
going,
be
I
here.
hope you're going home between meetings.
Oh, yes.
Just a minute.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me here. So I wanted to talk about the year-end financial statements, and this is actually the first time that many of the board has seen these financial statements. So I know we have a lot on the agenda, I'll try and move quickly, but I also want to make sure that please stop me at any point, ask any questions. I've been doing this for 18 years now, so these are very familiar to me. So if something isn't, it might be blatantly familiar to me, and I might forget to highlight something that may not be obvious for someone else. So please feel free to interject at any point and ask questions. So basically, we'll start with the income statement, which was the first report in your packet. It's the combined statement of revenue, expenses, and changes in net position, which is the income statement in most companies. So our income statement and balance sheet is broken out into health, dental, a combination of both funds, and then we have a comparative to the prior year. One thing that I just want to highlight right off the top is that in FY18, we had half of the year under our old health programs and half under our new health programs. So in many cases, you'll see some major deviations in numbers, and so a little bit, the comparative from 18 to 19 is a little more difficult to look at than the comparatives in other years where we have the same health plans. So when you come down through, we have our member contributions. Those are the premiums we charge to members. We have our a small amount of performance revenue. That's a contract that we have with Blue Cross Blue Shield and Delta Dental both, and they're both held to a certain performance standard. And if they slip below those standards, we actually require they pay us some cash. But more importantly, it's a way to keep track. And it's a way for them as a company to acknowledge where they can do better and where the opportunities for improvement are. So the 20,000 to me isn't as important as the identifying issues and moving forward in a positive way. So you'll see that the health program, we took in about 240 million and just over 7 million in dental. And again, that's comparative, that's down from the prior year, and that has to do with the change in health plans. 6 months through 18. Our claims expense for health was about 223 million. That's our largest expense, and just under 7 million for dental. Claims admin expense, that's the expense that we pay out to Blue Cross Blue Shield and Northeast Delta Dental. So that's exactly what we pay them to administer all of the claims. And I'll just deviate just a little bit. I mean, they do more than that. Basically, they deal with our membership, they deal with our subscribers. We carry Blue Cross Blue Shield cards, we carry Delta Dental cards. They're dealing with that. They send us a file in which we receive all the invoicing that goes through them because they're keeping all the subscriber and the claims. And then the payments actually come to our office here at Visbit. They're applied by myself and our staff. And so any collection activity, any payments, all of those things come through us. They send us a weekly claims bill for claims that have actually been paid out to providers, and I reimburse for those weekly claims. So those make up the majority of our expenses, is claims and claims admin. Reinsurance, that is the cost that we pay for Blue Cross. What that does is that insures us over $750,000 per specific claim. So if you had a very, very large loss, one person, not aggregate, this is a specific person, once they hit $750,000, we pay the first $750,000, then anything above and beyond that is paid by the reinsurance. So that's an insurance premium to protect us from high cost claims. And we have a few of those every year that we do exceed those reinsurance limits. Capitation is actually another form of claims expense. It's just, instead of paying per service, it's the definition in the word, but it's capitated. It's a flat fee, okay, for certain services.
Not decapitated.
Right.
That would cost us more.
You know, then,
Postmortem.
so then we move into assessments, and so, you know, that's a fancy word for taxes. So we have a handful of small out-of-state claims and people who live out of state that we incur some costs there. A little bit in federal PCORI, which is $103,000, the majority of it in $4.2 million in assessments that go to the state of Vermont. So that's Blueprint and HCCA, healthcare claims tax that you hear about. So that's, you know, that's significant. A few years back, we didn't have those kinds of assessments. You know, 5 years ago, we didn't have any of that. So, and then we move down into more of our change in admin fee reserve. We always have to look at, like, if we were to close out our books today, if we were to close our program, we still have to administer claims. We still have to run those out. We still have to pay those claims. You know, if you went to the doctor on June 29th, obviously that claim hasn't been paid yet. So those are the fees that we accrue as, that Blue Cross would incur if they had to run out our claims for us. And then we move into what I consider more of our operating expenses, and these are the things that we budget for on our budget worksheet, which we'll see later. The Visbit admin expense, a Vermont NEA admin expense, so those are for the services that your two service providers provide to you. Those are people and in some cases overhead and things like that. Because Visbit has a large mix of programs, you know, for example, you know, every time somebody makes a phone call, you think about telephone expense or office supplies or copiers or things like that. You know, you're not going to, realistically, it's completely inefficient to try and track every phone call and say, okay, so the wellness team picked up the phone call, so that's a VEHI expense, and you know, the multi-line team picked up the phone call, so so you don't see those things. So if you look down at the rest of our other expenses, you'll see there's a lot of things missing that you would expect to see on a traditional company's expenses. So that's what comes in and gets rolled up into Visbit admin expense. The computers, the building, the heat, the chairs, the office equipment, all of those things. Accounting fees, that's for your annual audit. As a nonprofit, we're required to have an annual audit, which we just finished up. We don't have our report yet, but we've just finished that up. So even though these are unaudited financial statements, the numbers are what the numbers are. We just haven't completed the draft or finalized the report at this point. We pay fees to DFR, and that is basically a pass-through of, they want to regulate us, so they charge us to regulate us. So they require that we send in quarterly financial statements, and they review those things. They look at our actuarial filings for rating and things like that, and they give us a bill for their time. Director's expense are the expenses here in this room, so we talk about, your mileage and the meal that we're eating here. Legal fees, obviously going directly out to the attorney. Actuarial, that's where we get the, any sort of review that needs to be done. And this year with health, that was looking at the net asset policy. We involved our actuary with that. And then on the dental side, we actually don't have Delta Dental. We don't use Delta Dental's actuaries. We have an independent actuary on the dental side that helps us with our ratings and our reserves as well. Remedy, I think you're probably pretty familiar with. That's another larger item, but that's a pharmacy benefit manager that we've contracted with to help us negotiate savings in the pharmacy arena. Just at the tail end, Bobby Joe joined the VisVet staff for VEHI in late August of last year.
We're paying her?
So now it's up in VisVet admin expense. And it used to be a Blue Cross Blue Shield VEHI dedicated consultant, because she was working for VEHI, she was on site 4 days a week, and we were splitting her salaries and benefits with Blue Cross Blue Shield. So the first couple of months of this year, give or take, we were paying Blue Cross, so that's why you're seeing that. We have our contract with Gallagher, who provides a lot of different services in the help of ACA support and support for memberships when they have questions regarding, some provisions, some required filing that they need to do, questions of some sort of mandate that they need to give out to the actual subscribers of the health plans. We have obviously we all have insurance, so that's, your errors and omissions, your directors and officers insurance. Other insurances would actually be falling up in VisVet admin expense, like your workers' comp insurance that you're paying on the wellness people. That's actually on VisVet's policy because they're VisVet employees, so that's up there. We have a handful of other miscellaneous costs, other AC transition costs. That's mostly travel, a little bit of printing the annual report, a little bit of dues and subscriptions, and then our wellness expenses, which is just over $1.8 million. So that brought us down to a net gain and loss for the current year of $9.4 million. So I want to just key on that number for a minute. Because, when you go to the very bottom of this worksheet, you see a loss of 5.9. But in my mind, the most important number is the 9.4, not the 5.9. And because that is really the current year, and actually, I'm actually just looking at health right now. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit ignoring dental, and unfortunately, dental gets a little ignored. But dental is pretty status quo. Things are going well. You can see we lost $534,000 on dental, but that was a planned loss because our fund balance is high on that program. So the reason I said we need to talk about the 9.4 is that, especially as we go into this rate setting that we're about to do, that's the true what happened for FY19. So everything's staying the same. Claims were the same. You didn't change rates. Nothing changed in the world, which of course doesn't happen. But if everything stayed the same, we'd lose another 9.4 next year. Okay? We wouldn't lose 6. We wouldn't lose 5.9. We'd lose 9.4. Now we had some things that helped us out. So I'll talk about those. One thing that helped us out was our investments. Okay, we had a large gain this year of almost 1.6 million in the health program. And overall, for both funds, it was 1.9 million. Now, if you look at the comparative, it was only $400,000 last year. And that was more normal, okay? One of the reasons we had a large investment gain is that we've been talking for a while about the potential of putting money into equities. And it took the board to become comfortable with that. But we did invest in equities, a portion, a very small portion actually of our reserves. But that made a big difference for us over the bond market. However, equities, can go up and down. And so, I can never count on that could be, I mean, it could be a negative million next year. It could be another 1.5. I mean, I'm sure you all have personal retirement accounts and you see it go up and down and up and down and up and down. So that's a snapshot in time.
Depends on which day of the week you decide.
Exactly. So this is June 30th. This is June 30th. You know, so so that's a good number to see, and we like to see that, and that's wonderful. But you can't count on it. And also, as we keep eroding our fund balance and keep having these losses, we have less money to invest. So right there, you're going to have less earnings potential as well. Then the last item here is your prior period activity. And I'll do my best to explain IBNR and prior period. So what happens is that on June 30th of every given year, the actuaries, whether it's Blue Cross Blue Shield's actuaries or our independent actuary for Delta Dental, they know that we have outstanding claims. We also have in the health arena outstanding pharmacy rebates that are going to be coming back to us. But we know that on June 30th, everything isn't paid, everything's not nice and neat and done for the year. So they do their best to estimate, you know, based on actuarial calculations and trends and all sorts of data, and it's a massively huge report and tables and industry data and all sorts of other factors and our own data. And they come in and they say, we think that, it's called IBNR, incurred but not reported. We think that number is X, okay? Then we go throughout the year, and I actually track those claims. So as we're getting claims invoices in on a weekly basis, I'm saying, okay, does this belong to FY18, FY19, or is it the current year we're in? What's the date of service on these claims? So what ended up happening for FY19 was, or FY18 was, they set their IBNR higher than what we actually ended up paying out for claims. And it was mostly due to pharmacy rebates. Because we keep doing better and better with our pharmacy rebates. We're working really hard with Remedy and with Blue Cross Blue Shield to reduce our pharmacy costs as best we can, even though it's still a huge number. And when the actuaries are looking at it, they're looking at historical trends. They don't necessarily know that this windfall is going to happen. So
FY18?
So the
Yeah.
1.8 million that you're seeing here in prior period, everything in prior period here really belongs to FY18. Okay, it's not FY19 results.
But
It's the-
FY18's closed, so you gotta stick it into
So you gotta
FY19.
stick it and you call it prior period. So what happens is, you know, they estimated it, and I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was around 8 million. And so they estimated that we would have around 8 million in IBNR last year, and what we actually had was, you know, 6.2 million, okay? And so we ended up with a gain. And again, that's great because we had a poor year, so that brought us back up to the 5.9. But what we have to be concerned about is that could go the other way. That could be, it's never gonna be spot on. If it is, I don't know, it would blow my mind. It wouldn't happen. But it could be more, it could be less, it could be significant, it might be a blip, it could be a few thousand, you know, you just never know what that's going to be, so you can't count on that. And I will say, while we're talking about IBNR, that when I look at where they set the IBNR for the end of FY19, they set it at about 4.4 million. And that's low. So there isn't a lot of wiggle room there. You know, when you're starting with 8 million, you get more potential for wiggle room. When you start with 4, it makes me like, oh, okay. And the reason is they're bringing up their estimates for pharmacy rebates now. It's because they're saying, okay, we learned this, so now we're going to apply this knowledge. So I don't think we're going to have another 1.8 positive there. And the other thing that I will say is that when they give me the IBNR, what I see is I see claims, and then I see the reduction for pharmacy rebates. So I see both buckets. They estimated the claims side of that, somewhere here, to be 11.3 million. And then everything else, and then pharmacy rebates bringing it down to like the 4.4. Already, we have actually paid out 13.4 million in claims. Okay? So all the pharmacy rebates still haven't come in, but I can already tell you they set the claims number at 11.3 and we're at 13.4. Now I've got 1/4 of rebates in. The rebates are actually a little bit higher than they projected too. So if I play this all out, that gives me back 1 million. So the claims are about 2 million higher than what I've got booked here. I can see that the rebates that came in for that quarter, if they play out for the next couple of quarters, we've gained back $1 million of it.
So we're still down.
But what I'm saying is, if I had to guess today, where I'm reporting these financials, is that we've lost another $1 million from FY19. That's not even in these numbers. And this, but so I want to talk about this and really stress this, because it's not just important for the financials, but it's more important for the rates. There's so much in play. You know, it takes, you know, when I compare to where we set the rates for the health program, and then where we ended, you know, we talk about that, like the projected claims. We expected 1 million less in claims back when FY19 rates were set, and we expected 1.5 million more in member contributions. So you think about $2.5 million, and we all think, wow, $2.5 million, this is a lot of money. You know what? That is less than a 1% variance, okay? It's not a lot of money in this world. So things can move very quickly, and you know, if you're within 2% as a projection, you're doing great. You know, you're budgeting well. You're doing a really good job. But I just want to make the point that, you know, 2% swing is very easy to have, and it's a lot of money. So that's my 2 cents about the income statement. Any questions on that before I keep going?
Anything on the page?
Yeah.
Yeah, on the income statement before I go over to the balance sheet.
Yeah.
Can I?
Yes.
And I'm not sure where it might, you know, the whole mess we had last year with changing health care. You know,
The TPA
the
mess?
TPA.
stuff, that's
That's
not
not
reflected in
us.
here at
So,
all,
you know,
right?
we don't,
Well, it's just that, like, bills weren't being paid,
right, but those were between the districts
okay?
and the actual member.
So that's not gonna get,
And, right, because that's not ours.
We were paying our claims.
So we paid our claims all the time. So there was a funding problem between, you know, or whatever the problem was, but there were problems between that TPA getting the people their money, in some cases. But that actually had really no effect or really nothing to do with VEHI, because the schools picked their own TPAs and then there was a problem.
Except
So-
that we did step in
so-
and cover prescription costs.
That's true.
that
Yeah,
was sort of
the payment
needed
trace.
on,
Yes.
And that was in the neighborhood of $200,000.
Right, right,
That's right.
right, so that's a good point.
And so that's factored in here, but.
That would be part of claims expense,
Yeah.
it would just
That
show
was
out
part of
claims
claims
expense. Yeah, yes,
Can you or Laura, since it's coming up.
Yeah.
The administrative expense
yes,
increased, I think that increased by some 9% year to year.
Mhm.
And I don't understand. I'm sure there's an explanation, but I don't understand why.
We actually
I think that it's.
yeah, we did
actually
this
was
at
part
last
of your-
meeting, actually,
It was
I
part
think,
of your
didn't we?
memo.
but I'm trying to remember all the specifics.
Well,
I mean, a lot of it was driven by, you know, some of that was bringing Bobby Joe in-house.
uh-huh.
I can tell you that right off, because
You did.
because that was down below, and now we have another full-time equivalent, and so, you know, there's her salary, her benefits, her overhead, her computer, you know, she works 100% for VEHI, so the space, all of that was a big piece of it. I'm just trying to think how much money it actually increased by, because it's easier for me to think about that. $92,000.
I didn't mean
That's
this to be a
basically-
test, I just.
No, that's fine.
Just a job.
So, you know, that's,
Basically Bobby Joe's costs.
so, yeah, I mean, without being disrespectful.
Right.
But also remember, that's not just salary and benefits. This is also the associated overhead with her,
Yeah.
you know, because, such as,
I know, but I.
such as,
please,
yep,
I
yep,
just-
such as her computer. You know, when we have, you know, her office supplies, her phone costs, you know, actually picking up the phone and making those calls to all those members, you know, making copies, you know, using the copier, you know, just all the general sorts of things that it takes to staff a
So what is it,
person.
so without worrying about the numbers, so
So-
if there are 20 people on staff, Bobby Joe gets a portion 5% of that sort of stuff generally, aside from the specific mileage kind of things with phones.
Well, there are, yeah, so there are specific things that are, like when you get the Verizon wireless bill, for example, you know, we know whose phone is whose.
Oh, right.
So, you know, VEHI gets charged for Bobby
Okay.
Joe's phone, and, you know, Multiline has their phones and they get charged for
Okay,
Multiline
but
phones.
where
So
you-
that is broken out on the bill.
But
So
where you
there-
can't easily
But
do
where
that.
you can't do that, then you have to make some assumptions.
Like building insurance.
And you look at your number of covered people, and you have to use percentages. We apply different percentages for different line items, depending on what's appropriate.
Okay.
So, you know,
You said something about space. I assume that means square footage
yes,
in the building.
yes,
Okay.
But not
Yes.
quite, because like the downstairs doesn't get charged against VEHI.
exactly.
Because we're not allowed that.
No, because that's, no.
No,
I'm kidding.
no,
I'm kidding.
no,
So
it's just that's, you know, it really isn't, I mean, VEHI does use it, and we do use it for VEHI groups, but technically we don't charge it against programs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we use part of our interest and dividends earnings at Visbit to give that back to the membership in general for all Visbit and VEHI programs.
The Visitor administrative expense is also computers too, is that right?
Computers, yes, computers would be in there, exactly.
Slightly off of that line item.
Mhm.
I assume that the legal services line item is not a percentage of,
No, 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 no.
it's VEHI
No, those are
specific.
direct invoices billed to VEHI
Right.
by legal providers, by the attorneys, and they're paid directly out of VEHI's checkbook. So VEHI has its own checkbook, Visbit has its own checkbook. Wherever possible, wherever it makes sense to do that, everything is split and paid directly by the two corporations.
Thank
So-
you. Any other
so-
questions about expenses?
I just have one
Fran?
Yes.
Fran first.
Sure.
Go ahead.
You lost John.
John, go ahead.
So the remedy analytics.
Yes.
525,000
Mhm.
under health is essentially an investment in 525,000 to get better prescription rates or expenses or whatever you wanna
Savings,
call it.
yes.
So about how much savings do we get for investing that much?
Well, we're
Just
getting
Just a rule.
expertise.
Right.
The actual contract for pharmacy is between Blue Cross and Express Scripts.
Mhm.
But Remedy represents us in that negotiations. And Chris, we just looked at the number, since we've had Remedy
In FY
with us,
16.
we've had $24 million,
23.4, something like
that
that.
sounds
range.
right, in pharmacy savings. Not all of it attributable to Remedy, because Blue Cross would have gotten savings without Remedy, but certainly it has been enhanced by us having that expertise. And Remedy provides us with more expertise than just the price point,
So manyfold.
manyfold.
Enhanced probably to the tune of around 12 or 13 million dollars, above the Blue Cross.
And I remember too on that contract, I think it's probably still the case, that when we first entered into that contract, basically if they didn't save us any money, we didn't have to pay them anything. It's capped, but if they, so it started at 500,000, but they said, if we don't save you anything, you owe us nothing. If we save you 300,000, you owe us 300,000. If you owe, $1,500,000, and the 500 is the max. And of course, we've been in a relationship for a few years, so it's gone to 525, but
It was very important on the clinical side of things.
yes, yeah. Any other
Fran.
questions, Fran?
Yeah, and again, I don't know if you do the wellness expenses.
Yes.
Does, this may sound like a really stupid question, but is there any sort of analysis that's done that shows whether the wellness expenses do help keep costs down for health
Yes.
care?
Oh, absolutely.
That's another presentation.
That's a different, okay, another presentation.
We've done it before, they've come to the board before with their data analysis. We did a claims match with Blue Cross, where we actually controlled for age, gender, medical condition, and the county you lived in. And with all those things controlled, whether you participated in the wellness, a certain component of the wellness program, we looked at two of their main components, the Healthy Life Survey and the Adventure, and whether there was a difference in claims, and there was. And it's, I know this is a trick statement, you could find it in your past board meeting materials.
Okay.
But we'll have them back
It'll come
as soon as you
around.
have
It'll
time
come around,
to do
yeah.
it.
It was right before board reconfiguration
I
too.
don't wanna cut Chris short, but I will have to cut other aspects of our discussion short if we can move ahead.